Hello everyone. I went out on my bike this morning just before dawn. I've got bright lights. I make sure that I'm visible and that I can be seen. And I went for a ride in the fog and the mist and the drizzle up towards Easingwold from York and then back again. Did about 25 miles in total. And I was heading back towards Haxby where I live when I saw a car at an intersection on a fairly rural road. And the driver seemed to look and see that I was coming down the road, but then at the last minute pulled out in front of me, and I braked, and it wasn't going to be life-threatening at any point, and I managed to stop myself quite a long way before I would have hit the car, which had already travelled on. And there was no acknowledgement from the driver. I said some quite unholy things quite loudly in their direction and rode on. Not long after, there was an intersection, and when I got to the intersection, the driver of the car was there in the car, and they wound down the window on my side, and as I looked in, ready to give them a mouthful, just said to me, I'm really sorry, I didn't see you until I was already into the road and you were already braking, and that's entirely my fault, and I'm really sorry." See, what happened in me when the person pulled out was that I decided in that moment, because I thought they'd seen me, that they'd made a personal decision to disregard me. They'd made a decision to say, "Oh well, just another bloke on a bike in the morning," and of course, roads are for cars. There's that kind of all of that mindset of cyclists should pay road tax, when in fact it's not road tax; it's a tax on emissions from a vehicle. And I just, I did what I regularly do. I decided that I was a victim of somebody's disregard. That it was personal, when in fact it was the opposite. It was their oversight, and it could have been serious, but it was still not something they did to me because they chose to. Yesterday I went to the pharmacy in Haxby to collect some medication that I take on a daily basis for blood pressure, and I stood in the queue and I was waiting to have my turn. And as I've seen happen before, someone in the queue ahead of me who was interacting with the pharmacist obviously wasn't getting the news about the medication they were expecting, and their medication had been delayed or they'd arrived too early to fetch it. I'm not sure what the case was. But what followed was a loud tirade from this person about the willful lack of professionalism that the pharmacy was showing, And essentially, the tirade ended with the person saying, "None of you in there cares about those of us who are out here trying to stay alive." And again, they made it personal. They made it about the intentions of the staff in the pharmacy, which I'm quite sure are anything but. Yesterday we had the good news of a very effective, it would seem, vaccine. We're not sure who it's not effective towards yet. It might be a certain age group of people with certain underlying conditions. We don't know yet. That's still to come out. But between a German and American company, there's been a collaboration, one of over 90 collaborations around the world, I think, happening at the moment, 12 of which are in final stages of testing and trials for a coronavirus vaccine. Good news all round, exciting news. And yet, just a matter of hours ago, in the early morning in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump tweeted, "The U.S. Federal Drug Administration and the Democrats didn't want me to get a vaccine win prior to the election. So instead it came out 5 days later, as I've said all along." Again, making it personal. That the FDA, that Pfizer, that the company, the Democrats, that somehow together they had conspired against him. That it was personal. It was a willful decision against his interests. There are lots of examples in all of our lives and around us all the time of moments where something that doesn't work out in the way we'd hoped for, something that goes against us, in our minds becomes personal. It becomes someone's choice to somehow disregard us or pay us less attention or offer us less service. And we become victims in our own minds. Now we have to be very careful with the word victim. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it this morning. I'm only going to be about 10 minutes, so I want to be very careful in what I say. Because it's possible to overplay the possibility of being a victim. But what we've also seen on the other side of that is that when victimhood is pronounced and when people say they're being victimized, that quite often that gets drowned out by the generalizing of everybody's apparent victimhood, or that some people's experience of life that is the result of the poor choices of other people, deliberate choices of other people, is somehow negated by the fact of everybody's lives being more or less equal in some way. So Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. We've seen what's happened with feminism. We've seen what's happened with LGBTQIA rights and responsibilities and privileges and just the normality of people because of their sexual orientation, being able to walk down the street holding hands or feel safe, never mind accepted. We've seen those things. And what happens in those moments is that in some people's minds that victimhood is made illegitimate. They just decide that it's not significant enough, or that it is that person doing what I've just described myself doing on the bike this morning. It is their interpretation of people's response to them that is really the problem. It's what they think's happening and not what's actually happening that is the problem. Now, I do want to say, I do think that not every single person who claims to have been treated in a racist way has been treated in a racist way. Not every person who has been discriminated against has been discriminated against. Because they feel that way doesn't mean that that's actually what's happened. But of course we have to listen to what's going on from that person's perspective of how they experience me or you if we're the ones who've caused the offence. At the same time, that person, like all of us, needs to sit back and say, have I made this personal in a way that may not be appropriate? Or have I overemphasized the bit of it that's personal in such a way that the fact of honest critique is lost? We see that sometimes in the sensitivities around the nation of Israel, that sometimes the ability that should be there to critique the way that Israel conducts itself in the same way that every country conducts itself, and particularly towards those who are outsiders in that country or deemed to be, that can no longer even be on the table because of the fact of some people saying anything like that is anti-Semitism. No, I'm not stating an opinion on what's happened in the Labour Party recently or anything like that. I'm just saying it's never cut and dried, or very seldom is it as cut and dried as we might think it is. And my reflection this morning is really about myself, because I end where I began. What happened in me this morning? I just assumed that someone had been unkind to me. Someone had deliberately chosen to make me unsafe on the road, when in fact the opposite was true. I wonder for you, as I continue to wonder for myself, in how many parts of our lives do we jump into victimhood? Do we jump into deciding that something, someone, some structure, some has it in for us, or is just disregarding us? We phone the surgery and there isn't an appointment for several weeks about something that's really worrying us. And so before we think about the capacity of the NHS, before we think about what its limitations are, especially at this time, we jump to conclusions about the lack of seriousness with which we are taken by the person who answered the phone and who had to say to us, after however many wearying conversations, and wearying not in the sense of, oh, I wish I could do without those, but wearying in the sense of draining, difficult and compromising conversations because of their love and care as part of their job. That person has had to have breaking bad news to people again and again and again about the fact of not being able to be seen as soon as anyone would like to have them seen. Let's not play the victim. Let's be careful about how we talk, about what people around us are doing and what they are intending in their decisions, whether those be governments, whether those be politicians overseas, whether that be the person at the other end of the phone today, or in the pharmacy, or in the shop, or anywhere else where we are disappointed because things don't go as we had hoped or thought they should. One of the things that I think the Christian gospel is about is taking full responsibility for our lives and knowing that we always are free and become more and more free and able to choose how we respond to whatever life throws at us, and that will always be our responsibility, and that some of that begins with what we might call grace. And one part of grace means making room for somebody to perhaps not being who we think they are being in that moment. So I hope you have a good day. I hope you are not a victim today. I hope you don't feel like a victim today, but if you do, I hope that you're willing to stop and think about where those feelings arise from and what legitimacy they have, and whether some of them might be about you and I learning to give more room for other people to be people like us, and for nothing to be quite the way it should be, or we wish it was, even just today. So bless you. I hope you have a gentle day. I hope you have a kind day. I hope you have a happy day. Back tomorrow.